Thank you so much all for being here today. I think this is such an exciting moment. As we heard, this is kind of our last chance to really unlock the nuclear deployment in the Western world. We've seen quite a lot of challenges across the board with some of the new construction projects, and we hope that with some of the more innovative approaches to policy solutions and regulatory frameworks, we can really shift this kind of bad trend into a really positive one, where nuclear can fully be able to contribute to climate targets, energy security, and providing affordable electricity for all. This is clearly a very complex topic, but I would like to give each of you an opportunity to state your thoughts and reflections about this issue, starting with Adam, please.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me represent NYPA to come speak here today. I want to get a couple things out first. First, I apologize for our CEO, Justin Driscoll, who wanted to be here today. He couldn't. He got pulled for another priority that he needed to do on behalf of the governor. And that being said, also want to just make the point, I think it was made a little bit earlier, that I wouldn't be sitting here today talking about this if it weren't for Governor Kathy Hochul announcing on June 23rd that she will help push the lead and ask NYPA to take a lead on developing the first new nuclear plant to be built in New York. So I'd like to give it a round of applause for Governor Hochul for showing such great leadership. The interesting thing about today, in the environment we're in, it's so polarizing, as you see, in terms of people who are challenging the existence of climate change, the politics around it, what's happened in Washington in terms of hostile towards renewables like solar and wind that have lost their tax credits. What's so exciting about nuclear today is not only is it a policy imperative and really out of the necessity of the new type of power we need that's clean and has firming power and it can meet the types of demand that are growing. But what is the most interesting thing to me about it is, given how polarized we are as a nation, this is one area, and Governor Hochul, I think, represents this, where Democrats and Republicans can be aligned around one single thing they can agree on. So to me, that is what is the most exciting thing about this today, because I think so long as you have that policy alignment across the aisle, that to me is going to lead and make this a reality. So I'm 100% confident that this is going to go forward, and you will see in the country that between now and 2040, United States will quadruple its current nameplate capacity of nuclear in this country, and it will help power us to be not only competitive in the world, but also for energy security and national security. So I'm very, very excited about what's going on. So yeah, go ahead and clap. So just a little bit about NYPA. NYPA has been in existence since 1931. It was a creation of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had that great vision of harnessing the great water power that we have in Niagara Falls and St. Lawrence River to create energy at a time when the country was just starting out and becoming an industrial powerhouse. And today, that energy is not only the cleanest that we have in the state, it's the most abundant. Together with other generating facilities NYPA has, we generate over 25% of the state's electricity. And that hydropower has always been the lowest cost power in the state. We use it for our economic development programs and encouraging large companies to come here and build jobs. Most recently, you may recall that we have, with other incentives, the CHIPS Act, have been able to lure Micron Technology to come and build a $100 billion chip plant in Clay, New York, just outside of Syracuse. So that's a huge benefit, and NYPA's hydropower is playing a role in that. We're not playing the whole role. We still have to solve that, and it needs other forms of clean, firm, reliable power. And NYPA's history has also been in coming in and helping the state through different challenges, whether it be when Con Ed was on the brink of bankruptcy, we actually took over a number of their operating plants, including their nuclear plants, which are already built, and we were operating them and owned them until we decided to privatize them. So NYPA's been there before and has done this. This time it'll look different, but we can talk about that. But again, this is something that we have a history of coming in and solving a state need. Just 2 years ago, again, because of the pace of renewables was not happening at the pace that the governor and the legislature, for that matter, wanted, they called upon NYPA to help fill that gap and go and build out at least 3 gigawatts of new renewable power. So we're undertaking that as well. So we're very confident this is a challenge that we can meet, and we're happy to be leading it on behalf of the governor. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Adam. Jeff, would you like to go next?
Certainly. Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank Nuclear New York on behalf of TerraPower for having us here today, and for all of the entities and people that have helped pull this together. It looks like a tremendous event. And just to address your question first before saying a few words about TerraPower. Yeah, I mean, the world needs more nuclear for a variety of reasons. Those reasons could span energy security, climate, energy poverty. Those are some of the core values of TerraPower. And there's also the theme of the electrification in this country, not only related to AI, but also vehicles and industrial processes and many other things. And so it's incumbent upon all of us in the nuclear development space to bring our technologies to market as fast and as safely as we can, and in a manner that's as competitive as possible on an LCOE basis with current technologies, in particular natural gas and natural gas with carbon capture layered onto it. That's the essence of TerraPower. We appreciate Adam's points about the continuity and policy in Washington, D.C. related to nuclear, and certainly we do everything we can do to foster that environment, both at the national and the state level. And in respect of TerraPower, we were founded by Bill Gates back in 2008. He's still the chairman of our board and very involved in our business today. And as I mentioned, we have certain core values that we anchor around in TerraPower, including climate, energy poverty, energy security, and global health. And in that respect, we have two sides of our business. We have an energy side and a health side. And on the health side, which I'm not going to spend any time on today, except for this one liner right here, we are providing a key radioisotope for the manufacture of a new generation of cancer treatment drugs that are being made by pharmaceutical companies or in clinical trials in the United States and in Europe. We're very honored to be a part of that ecosystem. And on the energy side, we're incubating two technologies toward commercialization. There's the molten chloride fast reactor, which is a little bit farther away, late 2030s. And then there's Natrium, our flagship technology that we're building, America's next reactor in Wyoming right now. And that is a technology that has nuclear plus built-in storage. And I'd love to tell you a little bit more about that later on in our time together today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Laura?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Melina, and thank you to Nuclear New York and all of you for having me here. Real honor to be up here with my fellow panelists and with you all today. It's been a really great day so far. I'm the executive director of the Climate Jobs Institute at Cornell University in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations. And so our approach to this work is we're thinking about how do we tackle climate change and reduce emissions at the pace and scale that's necessary, but also make sure that we are prioritizing the creation and protection of high quality family and community sustaining jobs as we go through this transition. So we have sort of a dual sort of look and focus when we think about this work and how we approach it. Really trying to think about, there's a lot of ways that we can reduce emissions and take on climate change. What are the ways that we're going to be protecting and creating as many good jobs as possible as we go through this transition? And so, that's really, a big part of what brings us to our focus on the nuclear industry and what it would look like to build our sort of next generation of nuclear, both in New York and around the country. I would say, unfortunately, we feel like protecting and creating good jobs has not been as high of a priority in this transition as it should be. And so really sort of bringing a sharper focus to this is what we're trying to do. And I think, the last election really drove this point home from our perspective. Obviously the concern with pocketbook issues was, significant. And so I think there's kind of two parts to this. One is how are we reining in the cost of electricity, right? Obviously we're all talking about this a lot, right? Increasing faster than rates of inflation. in. So on the one side, it's that, right? The electricity costs are a major burden for particularly working families right now. The other side of that is, are we creating good jobs, right? Do people have good wages, good benefits, access to lifelong career training, ideally union representation on the job, so that they can sustain their families and communities in this transition. So that's the ways that we think about how we're approaching this transition. And I would say that a big part of how we got connected to this work was through the closure of Indian Point. And we work closely with many of the workers and unions who worked at Indian Point. And for those of you that were familiar with Indian Point, there was over 1,000 workers at that job site. And many folks who had worked there for many, many years, employed in really good jobs. And so it was hard. And it was hard for the workers who were displaced at that facility, but it was also really hard for the local community. And for folks of you who are familiar with that situation, Entergy paid $30 million in taxes per year at Indian Point, and that revenue was lost when Indian Point shut down. And the school district there has closed down. We were contacted actually by the public sector and teachers unions there, who said, what do we do? How do we keep going? How do we keep from laying off people given what's happening? On the flip side, I had the opportunity to tour Hinkley Point C in the UK a few months ago, a 3,200 megawatt plant that RWE is building in the UK right now, and there's 12,000 workers on the job site right now. So just like thinking about what are the job creation and economic development opportunities as we make this transition, right? Significant opportunities on the job side when we talk about nuclear. We also do a lot of work on other technologies, including solar and wind. There are a couple 1 gigawatt solar projects being built in Texas and California right now. Big projects, bigger projects than we've ever seen. 1 gig's a lot, and we'll be lucky if we get close to 1,000 workers on that job, just to give you some comparison. And also would point out that unionization rates in some of the newer fields like solar and wind are much lower. We did a study on working conditions in the solar industry in New York, found a lot of concerning things around the quality of jobs in the sector, much higher on sort of traditional energy sides, including nuclear, where you typically see unionization rates at the 20 to 25% rate. So we really think about this from a labor and employment perspective. But just to echo a couple of other things, I would say, we're thinking a lot about what is the fastest path to net zero emissions. So many folks have talked about energy demand. It's been flat for a long time. It's not anymore, right? Someone brought up earlier, we're building, 1 gig hyperscale data centers. We just did modeling for Oregon. We projected that 40% of Oregon's electricity production is going to go to data centers by 2040. 40% of their total electricity production. It's huge. So we're just in a totally different situation. We just need a lot more power, and we need a lot more zero carbon power to deal with climate change. And for those of us who also work on like siting and permitting solar and wind, it's really hard to get done. It's really hard to get solar and wind projects permitted. And so we've got to be thinking about other things like nuclear. And part of the way that we think about it is we built out about 50 nuclear sites in the US in kind of our first go around. And many of those sites were built for 2, 3, 4 reactors, and many only have 1 or 2. So what are the opportunities there? And then also as we're trying to figure out how to build more transmission and distribution infrastructure, a lot of those facilities are already set up, right? The power is being generated, the transmission's there. So a lot of what we think about is the significant job creation and economic development opportunities connected to nuclear.
That was great. Thank you so much. Okay, so we'll have a little discussion now, and I would like to ask the audience to start thinking about the questions. We'll have some time at the end to take questions from the audience. I wanted to really start with a little fun exercise, a hypothetical. Obviously, there's a mandate to build 1 gigawatt of new nuclear power in New York. We have TerraPower here in the panel. Roughly 3 units of natrium will make up that 1 gigawatt. So I just really wanted to ask all 3 of you, kind of, are there already existing conditions in terms of policy and regulatory environment to potentially permit such completely hypothetical project? Perhaps starting with Adam.
Sure. I mean, I think basic framework exists, but it's not what it really needs to be today. Again, because of the importance that nuclear is taking on. I would say when policies were being done several years ago, even with the creation of the CLCPA, which was the New York State most aggressive climate fighting law in the country. You know, you had sort of fossil being bad, renewables being great, and nuclear was sort of nowhere. They were just not sort of lost in the conversation. I think now that they're moving up, and it's not almost just it's not a shift or replacement from one to the other. It needs to be part of the mix, and it has to be there to not only bring the value of being clean and emissions free, but having the reliability factor it presents to the grid, which is a completely separate value that, say, solar and wind don't have, because we don't produce if the sun's not shining or the wind isn't blowing. You know, nuclear has a 95% capacity factor, where solar and wind is somewhere around 18 to 20%. You almost have to build 4 times as much of that as you do one of nuclear. I think when they modeled it out and they said, even if you put in the overall mix of 4 gigawatts of nuclear compared to if you had to make that up with solar and wind, that's 220,000 acres of property you would not have to be taking in the state to be used for that generation. So it has the value of providing preservation of open space and other things, and making it for that. But what needs to be recognized today, when I talk about Micron, nuclear has to be recognized as a value for things like Local Law 97 in New York City. It has to be recognized to be CHIPS compliant, so we can serve people like Micron or Global Foundries or other chip makers that may come into the state as a economic development and job creation. So those things need to be changed at the state level. Things need to be changed at the federal level, and this is why this coming together of the Republican Democrats really makes a lot of sense now, and it's great to seize on this, because what do people tell you? I mean, one of the biggest risks, I would not say the biggest risk, is, you know, people are concerned about things like cost overrun and all the problems we saw with Vogtle in Georgia. There's been talk recently around having cost overrun insurance, which is a great idea. Maybe it has to be shared amongst all the parties, the private, the state, the federal, some sort of a way of mitigating that risk, because that's a barrier to entry or barrier to get going, because who's taking that risk? How is that risk going to be allocated? Where does the federal government play a role? Where does the state play a role? And on the state side too, just in terms of where, you know, we're working in conjunction with DPS, and we're looking at all these questions, and we're trying to figure out, where does the ratepayer come in? Where does the taxpayer come in? Where does the private sector come in? And I think it's really all of the above is the solution, but it's figuring out those pieces. But the big piece is we really need to make that regulatory environment ready to take on these projects, and in a very expeditious way, by also streamlining the permitting process and license process at both the state and federal level. And if both do it, I think then you've got all the things you need to get it going.
That's perfect. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. I wanted to ask Jeff, I heard from one of your colleagues yesterday during a panel that soon you might be announcing another location for your neutron reactor. He didn't mention the location, but he just mentioned that it will be announced.
Sure.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts on, you know, hypothetically, if this was New York, would you say that the policy conditions, the kind of regulatory frameworks, are they ready to kind of be ready for your technology, or would you like to see changes?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, let me just say, just to be very clear, we're 1,000% interested in New York. I just want to underline that right now. And we do have some great relationships that might be relevant in this state, including with Constellation, you know, I would add, which is very important. That's number one. Number two, if we deployed here at the gigawatt scale that you mentioned, it would probably be 2 dual units. I'm just getting a couple facts out there really quick, because each of our units is 345 megawatts electric base. And in our commercial configuration, we are looking at dual units, right? So it'll probably be about 1.3 gigawatts or something like that, before you factor in our peaking power, which I can put you to sleep with later, okay? But what I wanted to say is, if you're going to spend on a CapEx basis like billions of dollars in a state, right? You need to understand what is the environment within which you're going to make those investments, right? So that means the economic development incentives should be there, tax incentives. We'd want to put some supply chain here. So we'd like to understand the level of support for the businesses that might ultimately be part of our ecosystem. Those are some of the things. And then there should be, on the tariff side, some nuclear or special tariff that at least recognizes that earlier units are going to be more expensive than ones that are farther along as you go down the cost curve. And how do you sort of get a win-win situation on the tariff side that enables the types of PPAs that enable financing? Those are the things that I would say. So I think New York is on the right path in that way.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And Laura, what do you think? Is workforce in New York ready for this? Should this happen?
Well, I'm going to talk about that more in just a second, I think, with some of the other questions you're going to ask. I mean, I would just like really echo what Adam and Jeff are saying about sort of the regulatory certainty. And I really sort of draw on our experience with offshore wind, where that was a major priority for the state, is to build out a whole offshore wind industry. And we've made a lot of progress, towards that, obviously in a very different environment now. But the kind of clear signals of where we're going as a state and the regulatory certainty are so important. And I think, obviously, we work in New York, but we work in other states too. So, we still have states in the US that, have banned new nuclear. We have a lot of states that have clean energy standards, renewable energy standards, zero emissions credits. Some of those, standards do not include nuclear. So there's just a lot of unevenness in the policy, right, around nuclear. And then I think the pieces around the supply chain are really important. Places like China and France, where we see like a lot of success, there's a real sort of federal coordinated funded approach for this and a lot of focus on building the supply chain domestically.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. That was really great. And it actually brings me to thinking a little bit wider and exploring some of these global models that have been successful in other nations. And this is a question for you, Jeff. You have this very innovative technology, but obviously there has to be innovation also with the policy design and potentially financing and a few other aspects of these projects. Have you seen any model solutions elsewhere around the world that you would think would be useful for US to implement to accelerate deployment of your technology?
Thank you. Yeah, that's also a good question. What I would say is that new nuclear is hard, and we are fully committed, and we are going to be one of the companies that comes out the other side, to Isabel's point from the previous session. That's number one. But when you think about what we need public-private partnerships to launch. And it turns out that the US, within the current administration and even the previous one, has a pretty good model, which is the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. That's the program that TerraPower was selected to be in after a competition with other forms of nuclear, including the existing generation. And so that's a cost share program where our investors are putting in $2 billion and the US government is putting in $2 billion, the US Department of Energy specifically. And when you look at the world now, post 2020, when the ARDP was announced, you can see Japan, Korea, and the United Kingdom all launching similar programs, right? That are putting out the opportunity for probably one of their local companies to work with the government and get their tech into the market. So I think that's really the analogy, because it helps to build the regulatory environment, the supply chain, and the workforce, which is what we're doing in Wyoming, that we and other companies would need to be successful.
Excellent. Okay, then zooming back to the US and thinking about your obligation now to deliver this 1 gigawatt of new nuclear. I was wondering if you could reflect a little bit on some of the lessons learned that you've taken from your previous projects. You mentioned that there is a lot that you already know and you would be able to implement towards this new deployment. So is that something that you could just talk a little bit about?
Yeah, and I think it was touched on a little bit. I think the lessons learned from our experience, as well as the other experiences that didn't go out so well, gets to the issues of risk and allocation of risk, obviously. But what's really important here too is, I would say two things. One is community engagement is critical after you get the regulatory piece resolved, and building out the workforce. Those are two major challenges. There's a lot of expertise in South Korea on how to build these things and how to produce them, but we have to get them built here. We could rely on some of that expertise, but and this is a place where NYPA has been able to leverage its relationships with our brothers and sisters in labor. We have some of our friends here from Local 3 IBW. We also work very closely with Gary LaBarbera, who's the head of the Building Construction Trade Council. And as a partner, and you use the example about offshore wind, nobody was stronger in pushing for offshore wind than organized labor. In fact, the one that was stalled, the only reason that was able to get restarted was because of the advocacy of Governor Hochul directly with President Trump, but along with organized labor, who really doesn't get as much credit as they deserve for that. So they play a critical role in help. Go ahead, clap. We love our union brothers and sisters. But no, they're critical, and they have apprenticeship programs, and all these things have been built into the IRA and incentives that we need to build on it, because those are the jobs of the future. Those are the jobs that can be really good, long-term, high-paying jobs for people, and they've shown such a great aptitude towards training. When we started our renewables program, we allocated $25 million a year towards worker training, together with labor, community colleges, other apprentice trade groups all around the state, throughout the state. And to me, it's building up that capacity is number one. Number two, if you see the failures we've had in New York, whether it be out in Shoreham on Long Island, some of you may not be as old as I am to remember that. I actually lived out there, and as recently as Indian Point, we need to think really hard about where to put these plants. And some people, don't want them in their backyards. But let me tell you something, a lot of them do. And we've heard from so many communities around the state, particularly upstate, that are raising their hand and they say, come here. We want those tax revenues. We want these jobs for our area. We want it, and we think it's going to be a competition. We think people are going to compete to show how much they will be a partner in making this happen. So it's really about bringing that together, getting the right community, building up the labor force, and that's what we've really learned. It becomes a really key fact in making all that happen.
That sounds very, very right. Thank you very much. Laura, thinking about the level of ambition for the US for quadrupling nuclear capacity, that means high number of projects across the country constructing at the same time.
Yep.
Could you reflect a little bit what kind of either policies, coalitions, or initiatives are needed at the federal or state level to enable this to come together in terms of workforce?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, what I say here, I think might surprise some folks, which is I actually think that this question and issue is easier on the workforce side than it is on the policy side. And they're two pretty different things. So I appreciate Adam's shout out to unions and the union training infrastructure, and that's the first point that I would bring up, because I have the privilege of working with a lot of unions in New York and around the country, and unions just have this really incredible and impressive training and education infrastructure. Some of you may not know that the union training infrastructure in the US is the second largest training infrastructure here after the military. So it's a tremendous training infrastructure that already exists. Just here in New York, there's 143 joint labor management training centers around the country, training folks on a range of construction and building trades and other careers. And they're multi-year programs, right? When we talk about the nuclear industry, we're talking about highly skilled and trained workforce, right? It takes a long time to get trained for this industry, but that infrastructure is already there. That multi-year apprenticeship program that gives the workers the foundation for that career. There's ongoing training throughout your whole career, and you have to remember that these are joint labor management training infrastructure. And John Murphy from the UA Plumbers and Pipe Fitters will be on later on the workforce panel, can talk more about this. Folks from the IBW that are here can talk about this as well. But there's close collaboration between the unions and the industry to map out what is needed, right? What workforce will we need? How many jobs? When? what sort of skills will be needed. And so, that sort of shift to always embracing new technologies and innovations is just a natural part of what happens. And I would say, like, having done this work for a while now, I get asked the question a lot, like, are unions ready? Like, have they been training up workers for the clean energy workforce? Have they been training folks on EV, electric vehicle charging stations, on the installation of solar panels? And the biggest issue we have is that unions like the UA and the IBW and others have actually been training their members for those new sectors for a long time, for 20, 25 years. And the problem is that the work hasn't been there. So you train up folks, but then there's not actually the jobs to get transitioned into. And that's really frustrating, right? And that's, you invest, you take time off of, a current job, and you're not making money so that you can go into to learn a new skill. And then if that job is not there, that's a big problem. So that really brings me to, to the policy issue, which is that, these training programs bring in as many folks as they know there are going to be jobs for. And so that means you need that regulatory certainty. You need that guarantee around the projects, right? So you need to know, when are projects going to be built? Where are they going to be built? How big are the projects, right? All of these things. What type and number of workers are you going to need on the project? So those commitments are really important. And then the other piece that's really important are the labor and equity standards that are attached to that commitment. And make sure, as we say, that we're going to build out this next generation of nuclear, we are committed to these being, high quality family and community sustaining jobs. So people are going to get paid well, that they're going to have good benefits, that they're going to have access to lifelong training, right? And then you have the certainty for workers, for communities, for the industry, for the state, that we can prepare that workforce. So, I think that piece is easy. The harder part is the certainty in the policy and regulatory environment. And again, I would point to offshore wind, where labor with the state and many others made a commitment to build 9 gigawatts of offshore wind in the state. And from the very, very beginning said we are going to require a project labor agreement on every single one of these projects. That's just going to be how we build out this industry. And then over time, we got better too about really making sure that we had a very clear timeline for the solicitations. When are we going to solicit, the next 1,000 megawatts of offshore wind power? What are we going to do in terms of funding for port infrastructure? What are we going to do in terms of funding for supply chain, so that we're actually providing all of the wraparound support and funding that's needed to build the industry and the workforce?
Perfect. I couldn't agree more. This is something that we find really important at Nuclear Scaling Initiative. So I would love to continue this conversation. But I would like to give opportunity to the audience to ask questions. So I see there's a first question right there, gentleman in the back. If you can introduce yourself and phrase your question quite quickly, because we don't
Hey
have.
there, Chris Maslak, GE Vernova Nuclear. Adam, I just want to resonate with your points about a business model that looks at a way to share the risk, share the upside on potential cost overruns, especially for large reactors. And we saw, you mentioned Vogel. If it's a large reactor, $14 billion, it basically becomes a bet your company decision. Those are tough for utility, tough for supplier. Lara, this question is actually for you. When we look at workforce, right, the small modular reactor premise is that much more is going to be modularized, much more factory. So those are factory jobs,
Yep.
as opposed to 12 to 14,000 site craft labor
Yep.
that are temporary jobs.
Yep.
Okay. So, and GE Vernova, we have almost 3,000 folks working in New York State. So how do you balance, or how do you choose which of those jobs is more important, or which are more valuable to the state from a revenue, tax, et cetera standpoint?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you like me to answer that question now?
Yes.
Okay,
please.
sure. Okay. I think it's a great question. I mean, I would say two things. One, I mean, given what I said earlier about increasing energy demand, the need to have as much, zero emissions power online as possible, I think we need to be pursuing all opportunities, right, to be getting more electrons on the grid. So, we're very interested and supportive of both large scale and smaller scale, like SMR and MMR technologies. We also think about what are the specific transition opportunities for particular workers and workforces. So the Boilermakers are an example of a union that their members have been building boilers for power plants and for ships, mostly based on fossil fuels for many decades, right? And they are looking for their opportunities to transition in this economy and see that there's a lot of potential around the manufacturing. That is the type of work that they are skilled to do and trained to do and could do it. So I think, you know, probably the most important question for us is, are we doing that manufacturing in the US? Are we thinking about doing as much, you know, job creation in the US as possible? And then again, of course, making sure that, you know, we're making sure that these are high quality jobs. And I would point out, I think, you know, Jeff, you know, with TerraPower, I think that one of the main impetus to locating one of your projects in Wyoming was to locate it in the Powder River Basin, which is, you know, a coal producing region where there has been significant job losses. We've transitioned away from coal. So it's just, you know, those are the types of transitions I think that we want to be looking for and prioritizing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Another question, please.
Yes. Hi, I'm Linda Allenpower from the Institute, and this question is for Jeff. So TerraPower submitted their application to the NRC a few years ago, and it looks like the timeline is actually going to be ahead of schedule. Like, we're seeing certain policy shifts. Are you seeing any other policy shifts that are beneficial in this process? And I guess the second part of my question is that you guys submitted under kind of like the existing regime. And right now they're coming up with proposed regulations for Part 53. Like, what would you like to see push forward in Part 53?
Okay, those are good questions. Well, I would say, first of all, we have a very talented regulatory team inside of TerraPower that's worked very hard on our relationship with the NRC for a number of years now. And long before we filed our construction permit application, we had a number of meetings and training sessions with the NRC such that they would fully understand our Generation 4 sodium fast reactor and all of the associated technologies before they would ever get our construction permit application. And so all of those meetings and all of that prep really paid off, because even before these executive orders, we already were accelerated by several months, and the NRC had already put out an announcement to that effect. I think it was last year. And now, as you rightly pointed out, under the current regime that we're seeing, there is another acceleration, and we expect to get our construction permit. That means the permission to pour nuclear concrete toward the end of this calendar year, which is very much ahead of schedule by probably 9 months or so. So that's a significant testament to our hard work, and it's also shows the commitment to move nuclear forward in this market. On the Part 53, to be honest with you, there's probably others in this room that have strong opinions. I mean, I would only say, and I can see my friend Jeff here giving me the hairy eyeball right now. I know he wants to say something, but I just want to say for us, we are the Part 50 approach, which is the construction permit first, operating license request second. That's the approach we're taking in the early stages of the market. That's the best way I can answer your question.
Lovely. Perhaps one question if there is on this side of the room. No questions there? Okay. There in the back, yes. Yes, you.
Hi, my name is Paul Halsey, and I'm with Deep Geo. I'm Senior Director of Government Relations and Strategy, and I have a question for everyone on the panel. If the intention is to increase generation by 3 to 4x by 2050, and we currently lack any permanent disposal capability in the United States, do you expect or do you anticipate a bottleneck in interim storage that comes with significant cost implications, both for operators and for the Department of Energy? Right now, I think that DOE has been exposed to over 10 billion in legal judgments based on the absence of a deep geological repository in the United States. In the future, by 2050, that number, the inventory number, could grow to almost 300,000 tons. and the costs could rise to over 70 billion if nothing is done. For a full life cycle fuel solution, let's say, how do you plan to address permanent waste disposal? And how do you plan to eliminate that issue for advanced nuclear? Anybody can take that.
Any takers?
I mean, I'll start. I mean, I guess, look, we are still, I guess, on NIPO, I'm still carrying a pretty hefty liability for spent nuclear waste that happened with our facilities, and it's been sitting on my balance sheet for a long time, and nobody's come and said, you know, it's time to pay because we found a spot. You know, that was supposed to be Yucatan Mountain, which has never really happened. And, you know, someday if it does, I guess I can name it the Harry Reid Mountain. But you know, our friends at Constellation recently gave us a tour of their facility just over a week ago. So I really found the whole thing fascinating and interesting. But what was my biggest takeaway was this whole issue around nuclear waste. And I was really shocked when I looked at, they brought me to a slab, and they went through the process of how it's removed, how it's stored in these incredibly large steel bins with all of the bells and whistles around it. And it probably didn't take more from like that end of the room to maybe where we are here. And they had a number of these big bins. And they said that is 50 years of nuclear waste that's sitting on this slab. And that was shocking to me. I had no idea, you know, what did it look like? What does it seem like? And in fact, they quoted and said, if you took all the nuclear waste from every plant in America and stored it on one site, it wouldn't fill up either a football field or a large Walmart. I don't know, Rich, is that true? A super Walmart, okay. But, and I did remember, right? But that was, if I had to say that was one takeaway I had from that tour, that was the biggest one, because it's another one of those myths that, you know, people think is this big bottleneck issue that has to get resolved tomorrow in order for these things to happen. The answer, it doesn't. There should be maybe long-term permanent solutions along the way that people can get to until we do have actually fusion, and you don't have to worry about it at all. But in the interim, I think what's being done today is going to be more than sufficient to allow this to happen. And I don't see it being a barrier or an obstacle at all.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We are unfortunately out of time now, so please join me to thank the panel for this excellent conversation.